Even back before iBuyPower, the team that had made it to the final of the Face It Season 2 LAN finals was actually, some of their players were banned. Even before this took place, I always wanted to see kind of a shuffle between the top teams. At the time, it was just mainly Cloud9 and iBuyPower to make kind of a super lineup. Not necessarily a super team in terms of just raw skill, but a super lineup in terms of getting the right roles combined with the right set of skills, combined with the right stars, the right personalities into a team, people with the right mindset to want to practice and become the best players, so that NA could have a team that legitimately could be top 4 in the entire world. I mean, if you think of the people who are top 4 right now in like my rankings, for example, anyone in the top 4 or 5 can actually win events even. So it's not that you have to be the best to win events. If you can just be top 4 or top 5, you can win big European lands. If you're top 4, hey, you maybe even have a shot to win a major. That should have been the ceiling for at least whoever the best team in NA is or would have been. And so when Hiko left Cloud9 and they were going to make this super team, which was basically the iBuyPower players, some of them brought back into iBuyPower, some that had been kicked out, and Hiko, this was going to be the attempt at the super team, I was like, finally. And as a result, if you watched my video where I said, oh, Hiko was right, I think the move was justified and it made a lot of sense. And in terms of being players who wanted to accomplish the most, this was the lineup that could do it. Now then, a bunch of them got banned, so obviously that couldn't happen. So when I heard after this last, not the Face It LAN, but after the ESEA LAN, where all those teams in NA finished in last place, and even in theory Cloud9 is one of the better teams with a lot more money and a lot more resources, they finished dead last, falling behind teams like Nihilum. When this happened, I thought, okay, something must be done about this. And I said I'd do a video about the NA scene. Now, I'm actually going to make this a two-parter. This one's going to be purely about the shuffle and the moves that went on there and my thoughts on them. There's going to be a separate one that's about the NA scene and the mentalities of the players and the things that is wrong there and the things that the scene lacked. Because after looking into this more and more and watching a lot of the games and listening to people's comments on streams, holy shit, this is like a fucking absolute clusterfuck cesspit of insanely retarded logic and reasoning. So I'll leave a lot of that shit to a separate video. But in terms of, okay, the NA shuffle, what happened there? First and foremost, the reason I've set this video up like that is because I have to say, now that the NA shuffle is in theory all done and dusted and most of the moves are done and most teams have made their move, you can sit back, take a look at the scene, you know, have a nice cool glass of lemonade on the porch in there. I don't know where it would have a porch, Arizona, I don't know. Sitting back out there, rocking on a chair and just taking the scene. That's pretty fucking boring, actually. Not really a whole lot's happened there. What a fucking snooze fest this shuffle was. All this hype about, oh God, you guys don't believe this. Every team, there's going to be changes. Everyone's going to kick someone out, get someone in. Oh, great. Well, I'm sure someone's going to get an awesome team that's going to be way better. They're going to improve in a lot of sense. And hey, if we've got all these teams doing it, if we've got 4, 5, 6 teams making changes, surely one team's going to get like a decent quality of the talent and the right mixture of skills and fill in the holes for where they needed something and add in a strength to make themselves even stronger. And we're going to have one team where, hey, maybe they won't be the super team like before, because a lot of the players in that super team I mentioned before got banned. Okay, it won't be the super team, but hey, now we'll have a legit like top 6 team immediately. Just on the lineup will be like, the potential's there, this makes sense, let's see going forwards. But you sit back now after all the moves have been done, and the first thing you have to say is that did not happen. Almost every team made 1 or 2 changes. Most of them either were just a bunch of nothing, like you changed this player for that player, I don't really see much difference there, or they changed a player where even if the player was better, it didn't address one of their main problems, or they gained on this player, but then they added another player that didn't make sense. It's like he took a step forwards and he took a step back. The whole thing was so fucking underwhelming in terms of it being this big hype of this shuffle. Think about where the whole shuffle thing comes from, the big French shuffle. You remember this? The French shuffle was where you took Epsilon, which was Shox, Kirishima. You took LDLC, which was Happy, Apex, Kaylee. You took Titan, which was Kenny S, NBK, Smiths. You took all these players and you combined them into 2 much better teams. One that later became the best team in the world, and the other that initially was so outstanding, built around mainly around, in terms of the personnel, around Kenny S, that was able to win DreamHack Stockholm Invitational and have some great top 2s otherwise. So you took those 3 teams, you put the right talents together to form distinct playing styles that make sense and are viable in the game. And instead of having 3 teams that were like, one was good at strats and one was like had some good players on it, and the other one had like good players but something about the lineup didn't work to let them actually win big events. You took all that and instead you made two better teams out of it, and you discarded. Remember what I said, if you remember, about the French shuffle, that the last team, what was left over of the Epsilon players, which was Scream and all the rest, they were literally just the rejects. They was the players that didn't make sense for these other teams and wouldn't have been good fits, either because like if they were Foxio, they were a bit too toxic and hadn't quite proven themselves entirely offline, or if they were Scream, they just didn't seem to work in terms of a star role, or they were just bad role players that wouldn't be as good as a Smiths or an NBK, or I mean, to a degree, Maniac. I'm not really sure that one works, but okay. So now we come into the NA shuffle. That's not what happened at all. They didn't make the super team. Teams didn't upgrade much. So now let's look specifically at some of these moves. We'll start with Cloud9, because remember, now that iBuyPower's gone and they've taken a lot of their talent with them as a result of that match fixing being a grenade that a bunch of them dived and were blown up from. We've only got Skadoodle left alive. We're now in a situation where Cloud9, in terms of resources and history, should be the best team in NA. And what I mean by that is, the expectation of Cloud9 should be that they have the best lineup, they have the best team, and they have the best chances at these events, because they've got the history, the money, and the initial players to start out with, and a lot of initial things set. Instead, as I said, they finished last place at ESEA LAN before. They only could finish above all the teams that should not have had any chance against them at Gfinity. They really haven't put any results up at all recently. They didn't even get out the group at the last major. This is disastrous stuff. And so you look at the moves they made. Now, let's first and foremost, we'll think about what problems they had before they brought in these players. First of all, they lacked for skill. Definitely. Now, remember, when we're talking about all of these teams, we're not going to talk about them only in the context of NA, because that's meaningless. All these teams already could compete to a degree in NA. They were beating each other. One would place well here, the other one would place well here. Winning ESEA LAN was never going to happen at the moment, but in terms of placing the highest, a bunch of them could have done it. So we're going to have to talk about it in the context of not only international competition, but top international competition. We're looking at what can get these teams into the top 6 in the world, which happen to be the European teams at the moment. In Cloud9's case, they lacked for skill. They didn't have a reliable star player. Hiko had fallen off his game. Shroud was good, but he's set in a very particular style, and his passive style means that without more aggressive elements, without a better team approach around him, it was never going to be enough to emphasize his strength to be able to win. And when you put Shroud on his own, when Hiko had gone and Hiko's dropped off, if you put Shroud up against teams like Fnatic, etc., they've got 2 or 3 Shrouds in their teams. So you haven't got enough there. You're lacking in the skill department. They were lacking in terms of roles. Okay, they finally gotten Shroud into a role that made sense for him. This passive kind of like stay back kind of positioner, bordering on lurker, even though he's not really more like, I'd say he's just a passive player who holds a site. But then you had Nothing. Now, what the fuck is Nothing's role? Now, part of the problem with Nothing from day one has been this guy never can set a role and go, right, I'm going to become the best at that role. I'm going to put my whole life into just doing this role. So sometimes you make him an entry fragger, but then he wants to be the lurker and be the guy who wins the round and plays a clutch role. And then he wants to do something else. And in terms of tactics, he's not even following the tactics sometimes, or he's not understanding what his role within the tactics is. Now, in a sane world, you'd either assign him a role. The role I always thought you should have had was actually the entry fragger, because it requires the least extra intelligence and understanding of the round. You essentially just go in and the others will team play around you, and it's your aggression, your willingness to go in, and your ability to get those shots off fast and have some accuracy with it, which is a skill of his. That's one of his better strengths. And your aggression and the surprise factor is going to make up for a lot of the mistakes you might make otherwise in positioning and things like these. So to me, that's the ideal role for him. The idea that he ever said, well, I'm not going to do that anymore. If I'm the leader, I'm just like, well, that's your role. So if you don't want to do that, then you're going to have to go to another team that would like you to be the lurker, and I'm going to get in someone else to be the entry fragger. So that was one of the issues they had there. Also, in terms of their in-game leader, the idea that they changed from Sean Gers to Semfish showed, some issues with myself. Maybe Sean Gers didn't have the motivation to do it, or he's worn down by it. That's a bad sign, though. The really great in-game leaders almost never stop being in-game leaders, because it makes sense for them. They dedicated their whole lives to doing this aspect. You really need to be someone who's 100% in on being in-game leader if you're going to do it. Finally, their major issue to me, aside from all the rest, because this actually plays into all the other aspects. So yes, I could obviously say stuff like that their tactics were good, but they couldn't execute them because they didn't have the skills or the roles. Their CT sides weren't good enough because they didn't have the skill quota to play the Europeans. They didn't have a set map because, again, they couldn't lock down CT sides and get reliable amount where you know what you can get off that, and then you know what you can work off from T side, and you've got your set maps that are your best maps. All of that stems, in a sense, down to not having a disciplinary disciplinarian style of leader. And what I mean by that is when Sean Gares was the leader, he's the leader in terms of he reminds me actually in a very small sense of Lurpus when he used to be an in-game leader. Because one of the problems I always used to say to Lurpus was like, yes, you are the tactician. Like, you make the tactics, you design them, you talk to people, you try to find out what they want to do, you work that into your system. You have a whole tactical framework set out and you call the tactics. But you're not a leader in as much as you're not the emotional leader. You're not the guy who's the discipline guy who keeps people in line and makes sure people execute. And if they don't, hold them accountable to that. And if they won't do that, then you make the hard decisions where, because you're the leader, the emotional leader and the tactical leader, you make the decisions like, you know what, we need this in our team and this guy's not giving us it and his attitude's not good enough and he's not willing to do what we ask for or he's incapable of it and we're going to have to replace him. Sean Gares was not the guy who ever made those hard decisions. He still to this day has never cut nothing. Nothing apparently, I've said this before to people in the past, what does nothing have to do to get cut in terms of in-game play out of interest? Not be able to do a role, change roles constantly, have super up and down performances, only ever seem to have good performances in general at NA lands, except the odd, very, very rare odd game like that one against Orbit, who, let's face it, aren't a top team at Gfinity. I don't know what the guy has to do to get cut. Not turn up practice initially, not want to practice. Now, a lot of these aspects of some of them have been resolved a little bit, but even so, time and time again, the real opportunities were there to make these, and the hard choices were never made by the Cloud9 players. They just wouldn't make them. That's why people think about the history of how Cloud9 would go. They wouldn't cut people, except maybe they had some issues with anger. In general, all that happened is people left Cloud9. Now they've made a decision that they've cut Cephas. Okay, I understand the move. Like I said in my video when that happened, I get it. He had some. It's not that his attitude was entirely negative, but he had some negative or unproductive components to his attitude, especially within that team, and established that set of relationships, which I think to a degree did diminish the team and did hold back some of their potential to recruit other players and play a different style and practice properly. So I get that in terms of changing it. But what did they do as their moves? Okay, they got in Skadoodle. Now, but getting Skadoodle, A+. The best move out of all of this NA shuffle is Cloud9 getting Skadoodle. He is, in my opinion, the best player in NA. I mean, admittedly, at the moment, he's starting to get his form back because he had all that time since he was banned. He hasn't been on a proper team. But at his peak, he is the best NA CSGO player, maybe ever. I might even put him over Hiko. I'm not sure, because in terms of just the raw impact he could have on the game, and actually skill-wise being able to go up with the best players at his role in the world. Hiko, the difference was he was always very, very good, but he was also a notch below the players of his style in Europe, whereas Skadoodle at his best really was actually comparable. He wasn't on the level of Guardian Kennetis, don't get crazy, but he was just a level below. Actually, when you started to bring in people like Smiths, who else should we have in terms of AWPers? I mean, he wasn't quite on the Alu level. I think he's a bit below that because Alu's so consistent. Let's think of other ones. Nico, people won't remember that much. What are the AWPers we're talking about? He'd be, in terms of just pure AWPing, he's on the level of a device. A little bit below Olofmeister, but around this level. In terms of peak performance, you can see I'm already putting you up there with star players in Europe in terms of AWPing. Admittedly, not Smiths as he is a star player. But yes, Skadoodle, and literally the player where every team here should have been throwing a blank check at him, like, just come join our team, have whatever you want. In fact, tell us who you want to play with. Great, they've got Skadoodle, that's brilliant, that's a really good move. The problem there is the other player they've brought in is Freakazoid. Now here, I probably have a different opinion on this than most people, which is that first of all, the Freakazoid move doesn't make sense to me in as much as he hasn't played for so long competitively, and he's actually never played at the top level competitively in CSGO, it just hasn't been in elite level teams, so that in itself, okay, maybe they knew something about him before. I don't like that move on this sense, that I'd rather, if I'm the best team, I've always made this point, the best team in general shouldn't be recruiting the newer players. They should be looking for the established talent who right now they know he does exactly what they want, can do what they want, have seen proof that he's done what they want, and then they use their money and their influence, because they're the best team, to bring him in, and then they've got a secured piece there. That's the reason why in top level sports, the best teams do just make those big signing, those acquisitions to get exactly the piece they need so they can win the championship. That's why making the Skadoodle move doesn't make sense, why it's a step back. It's not a step back in as much as I can see the logic behind it. Like, if they want a pure entry fragger and for some reason they're not going to hold nothing accountable to doing it, okay, apparently he can do this role and he's willing to do this, and probably because it's a better team than he could ever imagine, he's willing to absolutely dedicate himself and know that this is his job. So in that sense, I get it. I just don't like it in as much as I don't think he's going to be that great right now. I don't think even... Okay, I won't put it on him, as in he can do the entry fragging job, and that might help with the tactics and all the rest of it, which were decent anyway. The problem there is, I still, actually in this lineup, this might sound shocking to people, I still see a lack of skill. as in reliable skill. Skill that you know where it's going to come from, what it's going to do in a game, and therefore you can build your plan and win the games and win key maps and have spots that you always hold that you know what you're going to get from them. So, okay, Shroud and Skadoodle, that is a great pairing. Right now, in terms of raw skill, that is the best two-man pairing in any team in NA. So in terms of overall skill in just those two players, they've got the most out of any other team. No other two-man combo can line up with that out of NA. But in terms of skill across the board of the team, I see issues still. Because one of the problems is, we've brought in Freakazoid, who is this player who is very questionable. He's going to be a very skilled player. He might be able to do his job, but that's it. Nothing really inconsistent still. He might get numbers, but his playing style, it's not that great an impact role. So he can do it sometimes. Let's call him like a hybrid in terms of skilled player, fragger. Have him as a hybrid. Now then, that leaves us with Sean Gers, who we know is not a skilled player. And he's not a player who's even going to have big games in general. And in the past, part of how he would make impact frags is he'd sometimes AWP, which he's not really doing that much now. And also, it was getting so that really wasn't working as much. So there's just too many good AWPers, and the way they could take battles with him was too good. So the issue I see here is it's going to all come down to nothing again in terms of skill. I can trust that Skadoodle's going to be really good. I can trust that Shroud will get his kills and have a big impact, do a lot of damage and use his sick aim. Those two players I can rely on. Now my third person, nothing. Because when we go against these European teams, when we go against someone either who has a super good AWP, Kenny Guardian, who can maybe shut down Skadoodle, there's an issue right there. When we go against teams like Fnatic, Envious, TSM, who have a lot of skill, they have 2 or 3 really skilled players, now we're always going to be lacking in a bit of skill. Now we can make up for that. The obvious CS game theory as to how you overcome skill is better tactics, better team play. But even, let's face it, some of these teams now, maybe against an Envious, you could do that. If you had really good tactics and you read them well and you executed properly, you could do that. Against Fnatic, it's going to be a lot harder. They've got great CT setups. Against a team like TSM, they have sick tactics. It's not going to work against them, okay? So I still see some issues there. In terms of the roles, okay, we did address that a bit because we got an entry fragger who's a dedicated entry fragger. We've got that. We've got a dedicated AWPer who's really good. Those two, you've fixed those ones there. Disciplined leadership, that hasn't changed at all. Now, that might help in as much as if this Freakazoid guy is coming in with a good mindset, a beginner's mindset, and he's not been a top player and he wouldn't have had another chance, so he's willing to do whatever's said. I could imagine the leadership will be less of an issue there. If it's the case that Skadoodle's a guy who will just do his job, put in a sport and let him go to work. I mean, we've heard these comments about he's too quiet, etc. I could see the leadership being less of an issue now because you've gotten rid of Semphis and he was some of the problem there. Shazam wasn't performing before, so I can see that we have, in general, C9 have done the best of all teams in terms of addressing some of their issues. My problem for them is my expectations were that it could have been better. You could have brought in another skilled player, or you could have got rid of one and brought in a better, more reliable player, or you could have brought in a player who has skills now that are already as good as someone like Nothing, but can be groomed, who's willing to listen and willing to grow a bit. Or you could have brought in an entry fragger who's a dangerous entry fragger, has a bit of extra game to his thing. You see, there's different ways to do this. So I still see some slight issues in terms of seeing how the leadership role will play out. I also look at this lineup and I see these players and I think to myself, there seem to me to be too many passive, I won't say beta because that whole alpha beta like mentality, it's just divisive in terms of what people take those terms to be, but beta in as much as more quiet, more reserved, laid back sort of people who aren't going to argue as much, who aren't going to be as forthright, who aren't going to be as bold as players, aggressive players. I actually see kind of a lack of that in this team, so there's an issue for Cloud9. So for them, great step forward to Skadoodle, but somewhat of a step back for Freakazoid, and you didn't address some of the issues still. Like if I look at the Cloud9 lineup now, I would say that if they do well, they can be like 7th or 8th best team in the world. But I don't see right now why they would crack the top 6 teams. And even if they had a miracle run, I think the best you're going to look at a big tournament that had all those, if you had all the top 8 teams in Europe at a tournament and Cloud9 went, I think best case scenario is reasonably like round of 8. It's not going to really happen that they get like a top 4 finish, most likely. Now then, let's go to the next team, which is going to be CLG. And the reason why they're the next team is because they're one of the NA teams that would be doing better than a lot of the other ones. So Cloud9, I mean, I guess everyone knows the lineup of Cloud9, so I won't go over that, but I guess I should go over the lineups of some of these teams. So CLG is Hazed, FNS, Taric, Cutler, and they only have those 4 right now. And all they did is remove a player. They didn't add a player. So they removed Peter. Now, the issues in terms of their lineup beforehand, let's think about them. So they were way too scrimmy. which leads into the second fact that that's what they relied upon to get these rounds, kind of bullshit gimmicks. They didn't have enough proper executes and strats. Like, I've watched some of their games, and I'm trying to figure out what their 3 or 4 T-side strats are on some of these maps, and it's really hard, because they just do something and it totally changes, and even the initial part didn't look like it was that planned, and it looks like people are just going off picks, which I'll get into in my NA scene video, but I hate that mentality just as our default style is we just get picks. Well, that doesn't work against teams that are much better than you. They didn't have enough aggressive riflers. Like, they had riflers, but then a bunch of them are too passive. A few of those players are just more the passive sit-back style of players, more team play orientated. They didn't have aggressive riflers. Like, one of the things that drove me crazy about that team is, like, Tarek and Peter. If it's online, yeah, these guys can both AWP, it's great. But in a real-world environment, I only want Peter to be AWPing. I want him to be the dedicated AWPer, and occasionally Tarek can secondary AWP. But otherwise, I want Tarek aggressively AWP. We need someone to fill that role. He has the skills. He actually has good aim. He should be the aggressive entry style AWPer. Not entry style, just the aggressive rifler. Okay, that's why I said AWPer there. Rifler. He should be the aggressive rifler in our team, especially because he has aim. He's confident, and if I'm let's all cards on the table. He's not a very intelligent guy. Like, if you hear him talk about the game, it doesn't seem like he has a whole lot of a clue about, like, intricacies of the game or what the opponents are doing or what they're supposed to be going in his team. So again, you put these players in aggressive situations, so they're using their aggression, their kind of their spontaneous play, impulsive play, mainly because they don't have a very detailed, conscious way of breaking the game down, to their advantage in this case, or rather taking away their disadvantages, their weaknesses of having to make hard decisions and being a clutch. So this is why in general you want him to be doing that. They now, due to Peter leaving, lack an AWPer. That's a big deal right there. At the moment they're only riflers, and here's the thing, if you're going to have an only rifle team, you can do it, but if you have an only rifle team, first of all, when you play versus AWPs, you have to be able to neutralize the AWP or get away from it, play around it, which requires really good team play and ability to read the enemy where they're setting the AWP up, and then strategies to execute onto the AWP, because you can kill AWP, but you need multiple people to do it, coordinated. So that's an issue right there, that one of their main strengths, which is tactics and execution, is what they're going to need if they go all rifler. Finally, the main thing that they lacked for was a reliable star. Like, you're going to say, oh, well, what do you mean? Peter was the reliable star. He wasn't, though. Yeah, he had the sick game versus LDLC. He had occasional big games, but actually, he could have games where he was like bottom of the scoreboard. I'm not just talking about bottom of the scoreboard, bottom in kills, but in terms of impact kills, he could be the worst player occasionally. Now, he obviously wasn't the worst player in general. In fact, if I had to pick it out, I think the best player in their team was obviously between Peter and Tarek. Now, actually, while I'm saying all this, I think that later on I'll actually do videos analysing each team player by player. But for now, we'll just go with broad strokes like this. So I thought Peter was a must-keep. Like, in terms of talent from the outside, you had to have him, you had to have Tarek. The rest of them, now I can mix them around. Maybe I could take one out, put another one in, or whatever. But for me, Peter was definitely a key talent. His problem was they lacked the reliable star. Now, maybe they could have had that if they put Tarek into this aggressive rifling role. Maybe if Peter... I'm trying to think how you could even do it, really. I think he just has to go like the full-on Skadoodle Kenny S route of always having an AWP every time and them setting the team up around him to do that. Because they've got these other team play players. Why have them just in default spots holding rifles, peeking whenever they want, holding back when they don't want to because they're more passive? Why not set the whole team up around getting this guy's picks off? So we're at least building him to be a star. If he can't be a star, then we remove him. Now, them removing him... I'll be honest with you, it sounds like bullshit. Like, listen, maybe they'll claim he had a bad attitude or whatever. But actually, if my read from the outside is that he's a guy where he's very intense, a bit emotional. And so the upside of that is that compared to some of these other players who at the moment seem like they're just cool with where they are and hey, things will improve and we'll carry on, he seemed like a guy who was really driven and wanted to accomplish stuff now. So there's an upside to that, which is driven, he's motivated, he's really hard on himself, maybe even on teammates. The downside of that is when you put him with that mix of players, unless they're willing to like kind of cede their personalities to him and say, okay, you know, it's okay for you to go off at us at some time and we don't, then they're going to get pissed off with that. And if they're the group that decides who's in the team, they're going to kick you out. And this has happened, and that's what's happened with the team. So in terms of as a general manager, just looking at the play, I don't like him being removed. Now then, since they haven't got a fifth player, I'll tell you what, why don't I suggest a player that they could get? So here we go. I would suggest the player that they should get is JDM. Now, he's a player that used to play with them before. He's an AWPer. He used to play before Peter even. So all these things line up. Lastly, we can bring him in and tell him you have to be the reliable star like this. We can set the whole team up around him. We can have executes and we can have the solid AWPer. Maybe he gets along better with the team. And it just to me makes sense in terms of a move. Now, moving on. Let's now go to Neolum. Neolum was Valens, Automatic, Sanks, and at the time it was Flowsick and Professor Chaos. This is the team that Elevate, when they had Hiko and Skadoodle, utterly raped. Are you even allowed to say that? I'm allowed to say that. It's my fucking channel. Get out my channel. They raped them 16-0 on a map at the CEVO LAN finals. But then at ESEA LAN, Neolum were able to beat Cloud9 in a best of 3, which is obviously the big news, knock Cloud9 out in last place. Now, they changed out Flowsick and Professor Chaos for Semphis initially, and then Hiko. And I believe it was like Flowsick who went first for Semphis, and then Hiko came in for Professor Chaos last. I think that was the way it was. Now, their problems in terms of this, beforehand, their problems was they were unknowns, a bit too inexperienced, lacked star quality names. And yeah, that's the obvious one. Now then, bringing in Semphis and Hiko. First of all, Semphis and Hiko instantly bring a whole lot of experience and bring a lot of knowledge about how to play the game. That's great. Their biggest problem I see right now in this lineup is that the upside of the team is that I feel like this is the reason why it makes sense to me is why Hiko would join this team. Now, listen, I'll be real with you. The reason why Semphis joined this team, let's be real, is because the other teams didn't want him and wouldn't give him an offer. So this was his last stand saloon or whatever the fuck you want to call that. Last chance saloon. In terms of Hiko joining, though, I understand why he might. Because first of all, he knows Semphis, he's a known quantity, and presumably Semphis going to this team, a much lower team, shows that he's at least willing to change his attitude and work differently compared to what he was before. But Hiko going here suggests to me that he looked at all the other teams and kind of saw it similar to me. These changes don't make a lot of sense. If I can't go with Skadoodle, then who cares? If the Liquid guys won't leave with me, then fuck that, because they're going to be doing the same old shit, and that's why they're too scared to leave Liquid. So when he surveyed the area, he looks and says, right, none of these teams am I going to get very much further with joining now. So fuck it. Join the team that's maybe the one I can mold the most. Maybe where I can set a base, start to mold people, see who works with what when I drive and push them a bit, and then I can recruit other people to my team and build up a team from here. So I get it. That makes sense in terms of the move. For the Neolum team, it's awesome for them to get these two players. They've done a great job. In terms of the players joining, yeah, there's some questionable aspects, like I say there. But going forwards, the big thing I see as a major problem for them, aside from some of the inexperience of some of those players, is going to be they lack an AWPer. When I look at the players they've taken out and the players they've brought in, where's the AWPer here? I mean, Semphis is best when he's at that sort of scrimmy, supportive style, moving into a lurkish kind of aspect. Hiko is obviously a very famous, really good passive player. He's not going to be super aggro with the rifles. None of these players really are going to AWP, and they're definitely not dedicated AWPers. I can see some issues here in terms of having the really good AWPer in a meta where you either have a really good AWPer or you have a system to beat the AWPer. You've got to have the OP thing, the AWPer, or the counter. I don't really know that they have that right now. So I think in the future, that's something where as they look to recruit and put in pieces, that's an obvious thing to bring in later on. Actually, I've just remembered, I've forgotten one thing on the Cloud9 thing, which is on the Cloud9 thing, there was also that other piece of news. Remember, they added Swag as an analyst. Right, I don't know anything behind the scenes about this, by the way. In fact, most of these moves, I don't know anything about behind the scenes. It's all just stuff that I'm piecing together from my conclusions, looking at it and trying to figure out my own opinions and analysis, give you analysis on it. When they added Swag as analyst, first thing I thought was, bullshit. Because first of all the players in the NA scene, I wouldn't recruit as an analyst. Be someone like Swag, who's actually not a very articulate guy. He's reasonably shy, not around people he knows, but he's not a very outgoing guy in that sense. So I don't know how much authority he'd have to even give people great analysis. He doesn't seem like a very cerebral player, and in terms of his style of play, a lot of it seemed intuitive, and he had a great feel for the game, but it wasn't mental, like understanding, calculating what to do here and what would happen there. He's not at all, in any sense, the kind of player I'd bring in as an analyst. I also am very skeptical that I'll actually use him as that role. Much like many of you, this suggests to me when they sign him as an analyst, either A, they know something we don't know about when he'll be unbanned, if he will indeed, or B, they don't know that he's going to be unbanned, but if he ever is one day, they want to have him locked up so that they can just bring him into this lineup. And hey, if that could happen, then that addresses a lot of the issues I said before and would be really good. I mean, admittedly, not that many aggressive players, but okay, that would shore up a lot of the things I brought up before. So I get it as a move. It's a smart move. I just don't buy it as that he's coming as an analyst, so that we should really address it as like, oh, and how will his analysis be? What will it be? And be like, guys, I was watching your demos before. I can't really do like a Red Deck accent, so I can't do his accent. Be like, hey guys, I was watching. I can't do it. Maybe I'll just keep going. It's like, guys, I was watching your demos and I was just thinking that y'all should try some of those just triple kills with a deagle. You ever try that? Guy comes in long A, you line that sucker up, the sumbitch up, you pooh, one headshot. I know there's a guy behind you. I know. I saw him. I peeked him. You do a little shift, a little shimmy on back. You take him out with the deagle too. This is terrible. I'm keep going. And then you know what? That third guy's coming up. Yes, sirree. You shoot around, swivel on those hips, boy. Bang a Rooney. You got yourself a little triple. 3, the trifecta. That's your triple kill. 3 kills with a deagle. That's what I want you guys to try. And everyone would just be sat there like, that's not even analysis, really. What even is that? Just like, why we paid him again? He's going to be unbanned in a few months. He's really good. Good analysis. I like it. Yeah, you were a thinker. Could you actually listen? Don't waste those gems on us right now. We might forget them. Could you write all those down in like a notepad file and send them, email them to me? I want to read them by myself later, and just to really pour over them. Yeah. When did he say he's being unbanned again? I think soon. Okay, so just like put up with the analysis and yeah, sure. I'm enjoying you being on the team, quite frankly. We never had anything like this before. I don't even know what. The accent went everywhere. Fuck it, we're keeping going. So, anyway, back over to the other teams. So, now let's go to Luminosity. Now, this one's a bit of a twist in terms of it being the NA shuffle. Because, okay, Luminosity was Flom, Lex, pardon me, Anger, Arya, and Frost. Now, when I saw this team, and they actually had like a couple of good matches, I think it was against Titan. I think they were the team that went close on cash, like it took them to overtime. When I looked at that lineup, I actually looked at the lineup and was like, hey, maybe this team has a bit of potential, because I saw in the lineup it had, who would it have been? It had Anger and it had Frost. And those two players have been in top 2 teams in NA. Anger, skill-wise, Anger was always up there. He was a very good player, actually, in NA context. A good rifler, aggressive, skilled. His problem was he's a fucking weirdo. There's something about him mentally doesn't seem to fit with any of his lamps. And more importantly, he was one of the main people who used to choke again and again at all those European lands for the Curse NA team and the iBad Power team. He was one of the main chokers. So I could get why he wasn't in the team. Skill alone won't do it if you can't express the skill, and then if you're too much of a fucking weirdo to fit into a team. Going beyond that, Frost, I always actually thought Frost was a good player. The problem with him was that he's one of those guys where it seems like for whatever real life reasons, he never 100% dedicated himself to CSGO beyond the early period when that first Quantic lineup split up because of the issues with Hiko and Semphis leaving and then Daze and the team all collapsing in on itself. And also, I will admit, even though he was a good AWPer and he had a good understanding of how to AWP in the game, his major problem was his rep always lived either off CS source shit, which I don't know much about, but it didn't sound that impressive beyond the NA context. And also the fact that in that Quantic team, which had that miracle second place at ESEA, I think it was season 13 finals, how they got to second place was with a win over Very Games. And in that Very Games series, he had the fucking series of his life. Like miracle shit, winning like 1v3s with an AWP. Stuff that would just never happen ever again. And so, unfortunately, you can't look at that and go, well, like, you could do that again, and if you could get up there again. That was like a one-in-a-lifetime series for someone of his skill. So, okay, on paper, those were the names I at least knew and understood. And I know a little bit about Flom. But when I looked at their lineup, I was like, okay, it makes sense that this team wouldn't be that great. They're like, okay. Now, this moves that they've made are really good for them in terms of the context of what they can do. They've brought in Peter, who the guy who got kicked out of CLG, replacing Arya. And then, actually, before that, they'd already brought in Pith, whatever you call him, Swedish player, to replace Frost, and Frost became like a backup. Now, the problem here is that you seem to have an AWPer overflow at this point in time, because Peter and Pith, to me, Pyth, should probably both be AWPing the majority of the time it's available. I think Pyth also has some rifle skills. The main issues I see here is I love the addition of Peter, as long as you can put him in a lineup where they can handle his personality, and you're not going to be holding back in any sense, and you're going to put him in those spots, and he can have a chance to at least show us if he can become a reliable star, because he was a bit up and down before. In terms of Pyth, my main issue with him is not the skills. I think he's got the skills. It's how dedicated to it is he, and what kind of personality issues is he going to have? Because I get a sense, when I look from the outside at his career, he's been in so many teams, rapidly moving from team to team. He's in teams with good players, but they don't ever want to seem to take him to the next team. He doesn't get the big offer from the big team as far as I can tell. All those, when it's a skilled player, are warning signs, hazard warnings telling you this guy's toxic. Like, step away, he's toxic, guys, watch out. But it looks so useful. It's like the fucking ring in like Lord of the Rings or something. Like, let us use let's use the weapon of our enemy against him. Like, no, you can't touch it, it's too dangerous. Like, that suggests to me that there's some kind of moddy style possible toxicity thing going on there. So that's a concern slightly. My main problem with this team is if I look at it holistically, the whole thing, it just seems like a waste of time in terms of it seems like a bit of a prison for Peter. I think they've got some skilled players. In terms of Peter, Pyth and Anger, those are some skilled players right there. If they have a good attitude, hey, maybe they can be battling for third or fourth best team in NA. I just don't see how this team becomes the best NA team. And definitely, I don't see how it becomes a top international team. I don't really understand the lineup in terms of that sense. But again, I can do separate videos for most of these teams in the future. Let's move on. Let's keep it rolling. Team Liquid. Now, in terms of prestige, some of the names on the team, money, Liquid should be a team that at no point in time should ever drop out of the top 3 in NA right now, and should be a team that's actually challenging to become a decent team in terms of the world scale. Like when you look at some of the lineups they've had most recently, some of these lineups, if they could play properly, should be capable of cracking my top 10 world rankings. But at the moment, million miles away. Now, we all know they went and failed at the fucking Katowice qualifier. Now they just finished last place at the fucking Faceit LAN, losing to Immunity. So this is a very flawed team. Now, let's look at the problems they had. The major problems this team had was weak terrorist calling late in games. If a game gets so that the opponent has more than 12 rounds, Liquid just falls apart on both sides at the late game, in-game leader related things. So in terrorist side, calling, they cannot fucking grind against international competition for anything. They can't do it. They just slow right down. They bait each other. They don't work. They aren't coordinated and quick. They're very slow. They're moving one by one. They get killed. It falls apart completely. It looks like the tactic, if it existed, just dissolves entirely. And on CT side, that manifests as really poor CT adaptation. As in, when they see some initial flashes and initial smokes, they either massively over-rotate based on too little information to make such a big confusion, or they don't do anything until it's so late that when they are forced to react, the enemy knows what they're going to do, and it's not able to have an impact unless someone has a miracle and just gets crazy headshots. And you should not be relying on CT on crazy headshots being what can give you a chance to win a round. It should be good positioning, working as a team, moving in as a unit, making good reads. And so as a result, a lot of this, I have to say, I think comes down to in-game leadership, because the in-game leader makes a lot of these calls, a lot of these decisions. And at the end of the day, if other people aren't in their roles, he has to hold them accountable to that. It's his name that gets besmirched, gets kind of dragged through the mud if the team's shit at these aspects. So he's the leader. So in that case, it's Adren. And I have to say about Adren, going in partnership with the Anger thing before, I watched this guy's videos on YouTube. I think he's a really smart guy. He has really great knowledge of flashes, smokes, the mechanics of the game, even basics of how maps are and how they should be played. So when I see all that and then I watch his team play and it doesn't do any of these things and it falls apart completely, it tells me this guy has some sort of confidence issue, or he's not maybe a born leader in that sense, because he's the other guy. It was always Anger and Adren who were the worst defenders at choking when they went to Europe with those iBad power teams and those lineups. They were the worst defenders of all of them in CSGO. You could rely on them to fail. Meanwhile, at ESEA, they'd be dynamite. Adren could be really good there for iBad power. So when I look at this, I have to start there. They had an issue with the leadership. In terms of skill, they had a good amount of skill. They just didn't necessarily have all the roles set. So now, they didn't make a change in this lineup. That's one of the things that happened in this roster change. They didn't make a change. Their team is Nitro, Adren, Fugly, Daps, and then Elige was the newer player. Now, in this team, here's the key thing. They didn't make a change, and that lineup still looks good on paper, but they should have. And here's the problem. They had the opportunity to leave. 3 of them could have left Team Liquid and made a team with Hiko and Skadoodle, a lineup which would have been better than any of the lineups that I've mentioned so far or will mention, and would have had the ceiling of being capable of some of the things I've talked about before, getting a top 6 or 7 ranking in the world and maybe having a chance to win a quarterfinal game and make a semi-final of a big tournament and maybe have a super sick run, who knows. All these things could have been possible with this lineup, but they wouldn't do it. Now, my read on that is Adren, maybe some others as well, didn't want to leave Liquid. Firstly, because let's face it, If they leave Liquid, then players like Adren can get cut, because if they're in Liquid and they've got this group that's been there before and other players come in, even the mental effect of that, if you're joining their team, they have some say over it. And you're in Liquid, hey, maybe as the in-game leader, you have a good relationship with the owner and he kind of likes you and he sees that, you know, you've talked and they think you're on the same page. It's going to be harder to cut you, harder to uproot you. If you go to another lineup, now it's going to be all in your performance. If you don't perform right, you're not going to make it. Now, I hate that. To me, if that's true, there's speculation, obviously, that's a loser mentality. The mentality should not be like, oh, well, what if I like totally failed and like I don't want them to cut me. You should be cut if you totally fail. If you can't do your job, if you can't be good enough to be in this team, if you can't be good enough to do the things necessary, and if you're the fucking in-game leader and you have these problems, Jesus Christ, man, you're the guy we have to rely upon, not necessarily to kill people, but to be strong and to know what you're going to do and to be going for the best, going for these aspects. That's another thing with NA leaders in general. The leaders are so fucking weak in NA in terms of emotional leadership and discipline. The one guy we had was the guy everyone said was an asshole days that he's fucking banned from the scene. So anyway, moving on. So they should have definitely done that and gone and do that. But even as they haven't done that, now they're left in a situation where you look at their lineup, and again, this is a team I really should do my own separate video on, but they're still lacking something. Like when I look at their team, what reliable star players have they got? Nitro's by far the best player, very skilled player. He has a problem in terms of, I don't know what it is about the role of how they're using him, but he's picking up, so he's always getting top fragged, but he's picking up so many of those kills. They're no or low impact frags that don't mean anything. That when it's, you know, 1v3 and he kills a first two and then he dies or saves, these kills don't mean anything and are not giving his team a chance to win. I don't know if that means he's not using the right situation, if he doesn't trust his teammates, if he plays for himself in the scoreboard. I don't know what it is, but a player of his skill level, he should be in the category with Skadoodle and Shroud if he's used correctly, and if he himself is able to reach his own level of what he can do. He should be at that level, but at the moment he's still a level below, and in terms of impact he's definitely a level below. He's not able to be the star that can just carry Liquid. His frags don't carry Liquid, they just put kills on the scoreboard. Now in terms of Fugly's a skilled player. I understand why they have him in the team. I think he has some skills. The problem with him is, I felt like in their team when they previously had Nafly, who I think was the player they benched to bring in Elige, those two players, they both had the makings of skilled players and they would have games. Nafly in particular had some ridiculous AWPing games every now and then. We thought like, oh, these could be star players, but they still lacked for something. Their style was too random. It was too inconsistent. It was too much just like either make the big play or utterly fail. There was no consistent basis on which it was built. So that's a problem I still see them having here. Liquid on paper has some skill player for player, but not skill they lack for skill in terms of impact skill that can do something in the game in its role. That's something I think they lack in a sense. And then the leadership's a killer there. The final team I'll go over is going to be Elevate. And this is the team that, yeah, they finished last place in Europe as well, but they had way better performance than Liquid did, and they were obviously playing against people like VP, like Na'Vi. Now this team, which is Roka, XP3, Storm, Rush and Desi, the thing with this lineup is their problems, and remember this is a lineup that didn't make a change either. I mean, they brought in Desi in March, so I guess they did a while ago. The main problems they have is some of their players, Roka, Rush and Desi, are too young, too inexperienced. And what I mean by that is they can't use their skill properly, or they use it in a way that the positive side of it, the risk that works, is the risk that will work against them as well. So in terms of this lineup, I actually think that along with Neelam, this is the lineup which has the most potential to actually improve. Like maybe some of these players can be molded a little more and maybe a little more open to it. And they have the basis of some more veteran players, XP3 and Storm in this case, who can kind of drill into these players some of the ways you have to play and practice. Those two teams I think have the most upside to improve from where they are right now, even if skill wise maybe they aren't quite at the level of like the Cloud9. I think Cloud9, Luminosity and Liquid in terms of raw skill on paper should be the best, just in terms of raw skill. But yeah, this is a team that it's stuck in the middle at the moment. Okay, that's their issue. They're going to be stuck around the third or fourth area in NA, and definitely nowhere close in Europe. Even though at the moment they're using all these strats, etc., that's like they're getting the most out of it. They have to change a lot about the culture of their players and the personality of their players. Because in this particular team, I mean, again, I can go into all this separately, but the issue I see for them is that they have three players who are all doing similar sort of thing, which is like Roka, Rush, and Desi. They're all these like aggressive, try aiming, peaks all the time for days. And yeah, Roka and Desi are by far the best. So if I were them, I would probably, if it was up to me, I would have cut someone like Rush and I would have tried bringing in another player. And now if it was up to me, I might even bring in hey, try and get someone like Nafly if you want to go for more skill, if you want to go for more team play. I mean, JDM's also out there, remember? The other player I thought that I should mention, actually, is TCK, the guy who used to be in Quantic way back with Dazed and Eco and all those guys. If you want a pure support player, this guy's always impressed me. I've always said to people like Dazed and Hiko and Cephas, why wasn't this guy playing in the scene still? You guys need support players. There's something I can go into in my NA scene video where they don't have proper support players. NA just has players who play like aimers but aren't good enough, and they're the support player. Just not getting kills doesn't make you a support player. You have to do certain jobs and be able to facilitate your team and the other stars in it. So yeah, there's my rundown in general. If you look at all those teams, some of them improved a bit, or they improved in a certain area, but there's always something drawing them back. There's always a key flaw or weakness that they didn't address. And so I actually am a bit underwhelmed by this. To me, this is more like the NA snuggle, because they all got into fucking bed, and they all, I'll bring in someone who I like to cuddle on, and then they all just went to sleep, and I'm fucking asleep in the background as well, one of those old-fashioned nightcaps, like the Man in the Moon thing. Just like, good night, NA, good night, Thorin, love you. We'll finish last at every LAN. Sure you will. Sweet dreams. Just like this, they didn't do enough. Okay, these moves weren't enough. So for all the hype around every single team's doing something, almost none of them actually made real moves that really impressed me that much. Cloud9 made some good moves. Neilum obviously got some steals there, but I'd rather some of that talent went elsewhere. I'd love to take all these lineups and pull them apart and make my own lineups. In fact, hell, that's what I'll do. When I do my video about I should probably do 2 videos, actually. I'll do a video about the NA scene, because my NA scene video is going to be general things about the concepts and how they practice and not understanding certain things about Europeans. But maybe I should also make a fun article where I try and pick all these. I get this pool of players and I draft my own teams. And I tell you what teams I would make and how I think their potential would be. Because I think they've done it the wrong way at the moment anyway. So anyway, there we go. The NA shuffle. La-di-da.